Look at that. You're here. I'm here. Oh, I know. Let's do a collection connection. The game that's just an excuse to talk about records. It's the YouTube sensation that brings music appreciation and Venn diagrams together in the most delightful way. On Monday, my brother Eric presented an album from his music collection over on his channel, The Plastic Soundwave Cult, which I have listened to, kind of, anyway. And from that, I've had to find something from my own collection that shares some facet or quirk with either the specific release or the artist in general. I'll talk about both records, but what I won't be doing is telling you what that connection is, because that's the hook that we hang our channels on. It's up to you to figure out the connection. Barring that, if you just want to talk about the music, or maybe say what you would have connected one of the albums to, feel free to do that instead. And so up first today, we've got Wonderland, the 1984 stopgap mini album EP kind of thing from a Scottish band, Big Country. From there, I have forged a connection to the 2007 release from a reconstituted Crowded House, the overlooked and underappreciated Time on Earth. If you could figure out what these two titles have in common, you can leave your guess in the comments, where the first right answer gets a shout out in my brother's next video. Now here's where I would usually reveal the connection between the previous pair of albums, those being the EP/mini album Wonderland from Big Country and Red Hot and Blue, the 1990 various artist compilation of Cole Porter covers. But I took a bit of a chance, and at time of recording nobody had guessed it. I kind of figured maybe nobody would guess it, so what I'm going to do instead is take that very same connection and move it forward. So this is now a third album in the chain that shares the same connection with both Wonderland and Red Hot and Blue. So rather than talk about the connection, what I'd like to do briefly is acknowledge that my last 4 videos have cumulatively gotten an average of 100 views, which is miserable by just about every YouTube metric, save for my own general view stats. I did a little math in the past week, and over the life of my channel, the average views on a video is in the mid-30s, and this is benefiting from the recent quote-unquote surge in views. And so having some people watch the videos, I have to say, very gratifying. I'd love to get you involved in the conversation and keep those views coming. I love it. I appreciate it. I appreciate you watching. But with that, let's go ahead and move on with the show. All right then, there's so much to talk about here. I hope I can get it all out relatively quickly. Right off the bat, I want to mention that Wonderland and Time on Earth, the album that I'm talking about, do share a rather macabre connection that is not the connection that I'm looking for, that being that each band had a member that passed away by his own hand. Stuart Adamson, the vocalist and lead of Big Country in 2001, and Paul Hester, the original drummer of Crowded House, in 2005. Something's, again, kind of dark to acknowledge, but I feel like I have to, because the Paul Hester's passing played a large part in the music on the Crowded House album. But focusing first on Wonderland from Big Country. So Eric showed that, talked about it. I don't know if he had in his video. I looked for it, and I don't know if I just looked away always at the wrong time. I even rewatched it looking for it, a track listing. But apparently his version of Wonderland is a 4-track EP, and the version that I researched was a 6-track, and so it seemed like it had various versions, which isn't the most unusual thing, but kind of around the globe. There was a Dutch pressing that had 5 tracks on it, a 5th track that was not on either of the other 2, and I forget which version had 4 tracks. Was it maybe like an Australian version, and then the US one having 6 tracks? And the breakdown, it seemed to be sort of made up of tracks that didn't make it onto their first album, The Crossing. It seemed to exist to promote a new single, Wonderland, and it opened with that, and that was a new recording. But curiously, it also got a single release in its own right, where it had a B-side, Giant, that was not on the EP or mini album that Eric showed. And the crazy thing to me is, as a U.S. person, as an American, a U.S. person, as an American, I think of Big Country very much as a one-hit wonder with their single In a Big Country. But I was living in England at the time, as I've mentioned many times before, when this album came out, and it was curious to see chart-wise, it was the third highest charting of the 4 singles released from the album The Crossing, In a Big Country, and Fields of Fire and Chance both charted higher than In a Big Country in England, and yet I don't really remember anything but In a Big Country, even though I was there. And Wonderland itself, this new single, also charted higher than In a Big Country, and it would have been released in early 1984 when we were still in England. We didn't leave until the summer of 1984. So even though I would have been exposed to more of their music, I myself still only really remember them as a one-hit wonder. That said, listening to it, it is that kind of strident music that is very in tune with U2 kind of at the time, even though they're Irish and Big Country is Scottish. But as Scottish kinsmen, Simple Minds would eventually get around with Once Upon a Time, that same sort of just big, epic, strident rock music, pop music, and it sounded pretty good. I don't know if the would-be title track of The Crossing didn't make it on because it was 7 minutes long and it was just too long to fit on the album, but it seems to be a good song. And I liked Angle Park. I listened to this twice in pieces, and the part of it that I only kind of listened to it is that it doesn't really exist in their catalog anymore. It was absorbed into CD releases of their first album, The Crossing, and their second album, Steeltown. Those tracks that got left off of The Crossing, I believe, are the ones that got chucked onto The Crossing as bonus tracks, whereas the newer ones, including the single Wonderland, its B-side Giant in its single form, and a couple other tracks got bumped to Steeltown as bonus tracks on CD versions. And they stopped making any sort of version of Wonderland itself. So in order to listen to it, I had to find the tracks, and they seem to be listed in different mixes and things like that, so I don't know that I heard the exact versions that are on either Eric's version or any existing version. There is an extended mix of the single Chance on there that I couldn't find anywhere, so I'm pretty sure I didn't hear that version anywhere. But I listened to the original version of Chance that's just a track on The Crossing and thought it was all right. I liked it better. I listened to it once on my phone, which maybe undersold it a little bit because it is that sort of big, strident, epic music. Once I played it a second time on speakers, kind of room-filling sound, it sounded a lot better. Maybe part of the reason that I don't remember anything but In a Big Country is that after moving back to the States, that's the only one that ever really got any airplay, since it was the only hit that they ever really had stateside. And the other tracks kind of fell out of my head and would have been from that period where I was much snottier about the music that I felt I didn't like, if I didn't feel like it rocked hard enough or whatever, and wasn't really strong on who did what song. But listening to these songs didn't call up any memories for me that made me go, oh, okay, that was a Big Country song. That didn't happen. But yeah, maybe the fact that I hadn't heard them, I definitely would have been exposed to them as they were, as I said, bigger hits than In a Big Country in England. I probably haven't heard them since 1983, 1984. So that is what it is. It was fine. It was nice. Would have been nice if I could have listened to it in its original sort of collected form, but cherry picking bonus tracks off of deluxe versions of their first 2 albums worked fairly well, I guess. And with that, let me move on to The Connection, which today is Time on Earth from Crowded House. There's so much that I could say here that I'm going to try and say as much of it as I can, but there are so many facts and names, dates and song titles and things like that that are all kind of stacked in the back of my head, hoping to get out in an orderly fashion. Then I guess we'll see how we do. But Time on Earth was a 2007 release. Crowded House was a band that they put out 4 albums through the kind of mid-late 80s to the mid-90s. A lot of people who are fans of Crowded House, myself included, think that that was a streak that had no misses, that there were 4 classic albums: the original Crowded House self-titled, Temple of Low Men, which is my favorite, Woodface, which is maybe the biggest seller around the world, perhaps. It certainly is in some countries, and Together Alone. And somewhere along the lines of trying to begin recordings for a 5th album, they did put together a couple more tracks, but Neil Finn felt like he had played out sort of the band format, wanted to experiment, do different things, feel less hemmed in. And so a couple of late singles were released in 1996, but they basically disbanded after that and called it quits. Neil Finn started putting out some solo material, and Time on Earth began as what was going to be Neil Finn's 3rd solo album. But upon the news in 2005 of Paul Hester passing away, that was big, that struck them hard. Paul Hester, as a drummer in a band, had a lot more kind of front-facing personality. He was always very much present in concert. He was a wit. He liked to joke around. He definitely wasn't just kind of hidden on the bandstand back there playing the drums. Often he would come to the very front of the stage with just some brushes and a snare and a cymbal on a hi-hat, I guess. Play some songs right up front. Loved to banter on the microphone. So he was very much part of the personality of Crowded House. And for a band that started as a trio, Neil Finn, Nick Seymour, and Paul Hester, was a significant part of that trio. Now, they are a band that evolved a little bit over time, similarly to Time on Earth. Woodface kind of began life as a collaboration with Neil Finn and his brother Tim Finn, that after experiencing some writer's block and trying to put together the 3rd Crowded House album, Neil Finn was, and decided to sort of combine the 2 projects, and Tim Finn sort of became a band member for that one album, for Woodface. For Together Alone, they added Mark Hart. So Tim Finn went back to do his own thing again, and they added Mark Hart as a band member. And so in 2007, Neil Finn is doing his own thing, records a bunch of songs for a 3rd solo album, but I think in part maybe because of Paul Hester's passing, Nick Seymour was there on bass, playing bass on most, if not all, the tracks. I'm not positive that he was playing bass on every track, but as it progressed, Neil was feeling like he wanted it to be like he was ready to be back in a band environment. And so they brought Mark Hart back in and auditioned a crap load of drummers, and ended up hiring Matt Sherrod, who was one of the few who they didn't feel was actually trying to play like Paul Hester. They were looking for a new drummer, and it was maybe a little too open-woundy to have somebody who felt like they were trying to imitate Paul Hester. And so with this new foursome, they recorded a handful more tracks, most of the things that became singles, like Don't Stop Now and She Called Up. But much of the album was done with session musicians and friends. And Johnny Marr is there. He co-wrote one of the songs, and he plays on, I think, Don't Stop Now. And interestingly to me, I didn't know this actually before I started researching this, that the song Silent House, which is just the name of it, evokes the memory of Paul Hester. You've got Crowded House, that's not much of a stretch. Felt like very much a rumination, and the album itself is very much a rumination on loss and grief. But I was surprised to find that it was co-written with the then Dixie Chicks. Now they're the Chicks, but Natalie Maines and co-wrote this song, and they themselves did a version of it on their album Taking the Long Way. Neil Finn does not appear on their version. They do not appear on the Crowded House version. But yeah, that was a co-write. I was surprised to find that. And so he sort of had an album shaped together that had Nick Seymour on it, that was going to be a solo album, and in order to sort of solidify, they didn't re-record those earlier tracks. They just added 4 new tracks using this new band lineup. That is why the album is kind of long. It's kind of a long one. I'm not sure if it would have been a double album in its vinyl format. It came out in 2007, so I don't know that there was initially a vinyl release. But coming around to it, long way, finally getting here. The songs, the music. I think that a beloved band like Crowded House, being one of my favorite bands of all time, you get both excited and a little nervous when you hear that they're coming back together, because you don't want them to ruin a perfect legacy. You don't want them to add new music that makes you think, well, it kind of tarnishes the whole Crowded House thing. And it was especially difficult reforming after Paul Hester, an essential portion of that band being gone. But I think they acquitted themselves very well. I think that it is a strong album. It is somber, but not morbid. And I think there's a lot of heart, like Don't Stop Now. If you're thinking about Paul Hester while you're listening to it, feels like encouragement, feels like resilience, and I think it's a great single. And She Called Up is sort of like that album's Something So Strong, very kind of upbeat pop song. And I think throughout, it is much more sort of adult contemporary than perhaps it was or felt in the 80s and 90s, that Crowded House music. But I think they're all strong compositions. I think it's a good album to listen to. There aren't spots on it that make me roll my eyes or wish they hadn't recorded that. And the same is true with the follow-up with that same lineup, Intriguer, in 2010. They put out 2 albums under the sort of Crowded House 2.0 lineup. I think they're both very good albums. I think they both stand very well with the catalog, and it's really just the fact that there's this 11-year gap that kind of recontextualizes the releases themselves. In 2016, just before I forget, in 2016, they reissued their entire catalog in these expanded deluxe editions. Don't love that they came in the longer sort of DVD length cases, but it is what it is. They're very nicely curated. Eric got I think he got the Crowded House debut sort of in this form and felt like it was way too much bonus material. But I like the way that it is very curated, and Neil Finn, he didn't just empty the vault. He felt like it needs to be there for a reason, and whether he thought there was something interesting about the demo version, the way it evolved into a final studio song, the B-sides that came out, and I happen to love Stare Me Out, which there are 2 different versions of, but there's one is a very driving version of that I would have loved to have seen as an album track. I'm not sure if it got dropped when the 4 new songs were recorded or what, but I love that. One of my favorite B-sides of all time. But overall, outside of New Zealand, where it went to, I think, number 2, Australia, where it went to number 1, and England, where it went to number 3, the album kind of came and went without being noticed by a lot of people. Whenever I would ask other Crowded House fans, hey, what did you think of that new Crowded House album? They would, what? Crowded House got back together? They had no idea. But I think it's a really good one. And it's a really good album. It's just a little bit low-key. And I'm okay with that. I feel like maybe the second album, Intriguer, kind of consolidated a new sound a little bit. And then when they moved on after another 11-year gap, in 2021, Crowded House Mark III came out with Neil Finn, Nick Seymour, Neil Finn's two sons, Elroy and Liam Finn, in the band, as well as Mitchell Froom, who had produced the first 3 Crowded House albums. So that lineup has now put out 2 albums, Dreamers Are Waiting and Gravity Stairs. Those I'm a little slower in coming around to. I think actually Dreamers Are Waiting, I'm not crazy about the cover for some reason, which annoys me. I feel like that's colored my opinion of it somehow, but I think the songs are good, and Sweet Tooth is a great single off of that album that you should give a listen if you haven't heard it. And then Gravity Stairs is a recent release, so I'm still sort of absorbing that a little bit. But I think it's got... I don't think Crowded House has put out a bad album, let me put it that way. Some of the things maybe don't crest, the heights of Temple of Low Men, which it's difficult to do as one of my favorite albums of all time. That's got to be a top 5 album for me, Temple of Low Men. But yeah, I think Time on Earth is worth your time. Maybe not in the expanded version, but the original album, 14 tracks. It's got a mood, but it's still got hooks. It's still pop songs. It's still Crowded House. And I think it's a good one. I don't know what Eric will think of it. I think it maybe takes a couple of listens to worm its way under your skin because it is kind of low-key. But I think Don't Stop Now should catch Eric's ear. And it might catch your ear if you haven't heard it. It's a very poignant song. The whole album is a reflection in some senses, even when it's indirect. Just the impact of Paul Hester's passing is just present on the album. He's sort of still there even though he's gone. And so the album is dedicated to him. And yeah, it's a good one. So, gosh, I hope this isn't going to run over 20 minutes. But if you have a guess as to what the connection might be now in a chain of Don't Stop Now, this album, Time on Earth, and Red Hot and Blue, and Big Country's Wonderland, throw that down in the comments. I will note that Big Country, the Wonderland had The Crossing, which was sort of the title track of the album The Crossing, but didn't appear on that album. And Time on Earth, if you're really into your Crowded House lore, is the name of a song that Neil Finn had written for that album that didn't appear on that album. But that doesn't quite work as a connection, even though it's true that it stuck in his mind as appropriate, sort of, about, again, seizing the moment, the limited time that we have on Earth. I don't know where I'm going with that. So let's just leave it at that. That's not the connection. But there is a connection. That is true. That, again, passes through all 3 of those records. Hopefully somebody hasn't guessed it on Eric's and made this whole thing blow up in my face. But if it did, I guess it did. I thought it would be fun to be able to talk about this album, which I do believe is underappreciated and underknown. So I'll do my little bit to my, handful of subscribers to spread the word, proselytize in favor of Crowded House's Time on Earth from 2007. And with that, Eric will have a connection to this album. Maybe making it 4 in a row if nobody guesses this connection yet again. He's threatened it. He told me, he said, yeah, I got one that I could do if nobody guesses it. So if you want to make Eric put in some work and come up with a new connection, leave your guess down in the comments. And he will acknowledge you in his next video on Monday when he has a connection to Crowded House's Time on Earth. And with that, that's all I have. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye. Good show, Ponsonby.